The global pandemic forced both employers and employees to re-look at the world of work. Since then, multiple studies have been carried out to investigate the viability of a 4-day work week. Studies have also been carried out in South Africa, and the results are in. The 4-day work week, as proposed, is one where you work only 32 hours a week but get paid for, believe it, 40 hours. Additionally, you will then get overtime pay for all hours worked in excess of 32 in a week. To discuss this, we're joined by Karen Lowe, Director of 4-Day Week South Africa. Karen, very good evening. Great to speak to you. You and I first spoke on this issue, I think, close on a year ago. Just bring us up to speed with what progress you've made in the various studies and just how happy are those employees who are working 4 days a week?
More happy than you are, I think, Hugo. Right now, we're going to have a word with your production team here and make sure we get you down to a 32-hour work week. It's gone very, very well, and thank you very much for having me. We received the results 2 weeks ago. So 28 companies started with us. 1st of March, the trial started, and it was a 6-month trial, and 26 of them finished, remembering that one of them was from Botswana. And the results have been fantastic. So in a nutshell, it was a productivity positive and revenue positive experiment, and we saw very, very similar results to other global trials that have taken place in the more developed nations. And I think that perhaps for me, that was the most exciting, rewarding, and proud moment for me when I finally got my hands on the South African data, waiting anxiously to see what it was going to say, that our 28 companies did indeed perform really, really well relative to the global standards, and the research just says exactly what it should say, which is if you take intentional rest and you focus on what you do well at work, and you work well while you're at work, and you take intentional rest when you're not at work, you're able to improve your mental health, you're able to get some exercise banked, you're able to improve your sleep, and so on and so forth. So I'm very excited that the results are out, and we've got a wonderful foundation to start moving and pushing other organizations into the space to see how reduced hours working can assist with their workforces.
So Karen, imagine if the board was sitting and looking at those numbers, to be thinking to themselves, marketing, obviously, they'd be first up to say, you know what, 4 days, excellent. We can do with 32 hours. Human resources will be well pleased that everybody is brighter and in better spirits at the end of each week. But the finance director or the chief finance officer will be looking at the bottom line. So let's start there and do an assessment of what are the measures by which you judged the success of this, starting off with that bottom line.
So Hugo, essentially this is a productivity experiment at its heart. So it is very much looking at how we can maintain or preferably improve the productivity outputs of the organizations that take part. But there are other direct costs to bottom line, which the C-suite and board, and particularly a CFO, would be looking to monitor. And that is the cost of absenteeism, the cost of presenteeism, the cost of resignations. And obviously, if you are continuously having to recruit and fill your talent pipeline, there is an enormous cost to recruiting new staff as opposed to retaining and upskilling new staff. So those are all bottom line metrics. The business case is not about we're going to make money from the 4-day week. It's about saving money. It's about surfacing the right issues. It's about refining your systems and processes to ensure that you are, looking at your workforce from a capacity perspective, Hugo. Everyone has certain capacity on a weekly, monthly, and annual basis. And South Africa is incredibly constrained. So if you've got absenteeism at high levels or mental health as a component of well-being, we know just how prevalent it is in South Africa, then you've got unhappy and struggling staff that are not performing at their optimum. So the CFO will definitely look at what the cost savings potentially could be from a more productive, but happier and healthier. And then obviously the softer metrics, the engagement scores. These companies are spending millions every year getting an engagement read on what their organization, how loyal their employees are, what the service levels are like, what the culture is like, what the leadership is doing. This will cost a lot of money. So the 4-day week really and the whole reduced work hours experiment is a win-win. And you don't often find a workplace experiment that says, how do we keep productivity positive as the number one thing? From there, it's if we can hold that productivity, then there is an earned and deliberate rest strategy. So you're just balancing the scales. And ultimately, you go, time is worth a lot more than money. And you're seeing this in global studies, and it's no different in South Africa. Your ability to attract and retain good talent without necessarily having to add to the cost from a remuneration perspective is definitely something that we're starting to see, not just in South Africa, but globally.
Now, at a stab, I'd like to think that industries such as manufacturing probably would find it very hard to do what they need to do within a 4-day week, primarily because many of them work 7 days a week, 24/7. So let's talk about those industries that took part in those 28 companies. What industries do they represent?
So, Hugo, typically all of the first cohorts for any territory will be knowledge worker environments. So we didn't have any manufacturing, FMC retail banking, but we didn't have those kind of pilot participants, and neither did the likes of the UK, Australia, and other developed countries. But what we are seeing increasingly around the world is a move into those spaces. So we have had a couple of global manufacturers do it. We've had a couple of organizations that have had both front-end and back-end staff. And in fact, the founding partner, Perpetual Guardian, they're in estate management. They have branches. So, and they've done it successfully since 2019. So we are definitely seeing an interest in industry sectors where it would typically be harder. But you've also hit on a very important point. Everybody assumes that the 4-day week is a Friday off and would not necessarily apply to organizations that are working perhaps 7 days a week and 24/7. And we have had some organizations like 24/7 emergency rooms and manufacturing environments where they've gone in and they've assessed the shift environment. And they've gone, what happens if we keep the same shift ratio, for example, but we reduce that shift by 20%? And there was a big and very successful case study in New Zealand in an emergency room where all the doctors and nurses, we were seeing high attrition, high burnout, spending an awful lot of money on lawsuits because of poor patient care and on locums to replace the doctors and nurses that were not showing up for work. And a 20% reduction in shift saw an immediate move and change within that work ecosystem. So, Hugo, while it is more difficult to apply in certain sectors, it is certainly not impossible. And perhaps one of the most, the biggest success stories in South Africa was actually Marty's Gymnasium, which was part of Stellenbosch University. It was the first fitness company in the world. And that is quite a complex environment. You've got fitness trainers. They don't work predictable hours. It's not a typical 9-to-5 job. And the benefits that they saw were quite substantial. So it's not impossible, but the organizations that want to try this must realize that it is not something you switch on. It doesn't mean it's a Friday off. And it does take a lot of planning and preparation to get yourself trial ready and very much an experimental and visionary leadership to get you over the line.
Now, Karen, very, very quickly before we let you go, I know you've got the number to head of HR, so you will make that call. But what about those that are interested in the 4-day week and would like to reach out to you? Where do they find you?
You're welcome to find me on LinkedIn. So it's Karen Lowe and 4-day week South Africa, and then we've got 4dayweek.co.za. We have a number of organizations starting trials next year, and we are also in discussions with some government sectors as well as philanthropists looking to do sector-sponsored trials. So hoping to get some experience in manufacturing, in retail banking, and in some of the more complex sectors. So 2024, we've got a good foundation to work off, and we'll definitely do some more research and pilots in the new year.
Karen, fantastic speaking to you as always. Wish you a Merry Christmas.